My father banished me, pregnant, into the brutal chill. 3 years later, when I was 20, he resurfaced, demanding custody of my son. But my old history professor stood firm, acting as a shield before calling the authorities. When my father first discovered my pregnancy, he showed no compassion, caring nothing that a man twice my age had violated me. All he saw was a stain on his reputation. In the dead of a November night, he cast me out into the biting frost. I was 17 and utterly adrift. I sought refuge in a public restroom near Cedar Creek Park, struggling not to succumb to the cold, while unconsciously stroking my belly and daydreaming about a child I'd sworn I never wanted. The following morning, Eleanor Vance found me huddled in a hidden corner of the high school restroom. I hadn't dared to stay in the park after the encounters with those unsettling men who kept circling back. Eleanor was my 11th grade history instructor, and she'd always told me that if I truly believed in my narrative, I could pen my way out of any predicament. When she saw my meager belongings stuffed into trash bags, I broke down. The sobs were so violent I couldn't catch my breath. "You're coming to my place," she declared. I collapsed into her embrace, the first time anyone had held me since that terrifying night, desperate to feel that I wasn't fundamentally tainted. She canceled her morning classes and drove me to her house. I wept the entire drive, overwhelmed by a kindness that felt alien. Charlotte Hayes lived alone in a cozy 2-story house near Magnolia Street, filled with stacks of books and a trio of curious rescue cats that refused to leave my stomach alone, as if sensing the life within. She quickly prepared the spare room in her sun-drenched study for me. She accompanied me to every prenatal appointment, never correcting the clinic staff when they naturally assumed she was my mother. She'd patiently hold my hair during bouts of morning sickness, telling me about her wife, Vivian Stone, who had passed away 4 years ago. They had struggled to conceive for nearly a decade before their time ran out. "Perhaps you two were the second chapter Vivian and I were meant to have," she murmured as I leaned over the toilet bowl again. I was left grieving, not just for my situation, but for the profound irony that this stranger was fulfilling the role my own mother had abandoned. We settled into a steady rhythm. She monitored my progress through my GED online courses, and I helped her organize and grade student papers. My abdomen slowly expanded, as did the nascent hope that I might genuinely learn to cherish this baby, a thought unthinkable just months before. She'd rest her palm on my belly, softly telling the baby about all the classics they'd read and the trips they'd take to the New England coast. A genuine belief began to take root in me that we could truly make this work. Eleanor Vance held my hand throughout my 21-hour labor. I cried out for my mother, who never materialized. My parents ignored all calls from Boston General Hospital. Eleanor had the honor of cutting the cord and was the third person after the delivery nurse and me to hold him. We both teared up when his tiny, perfect hand closed around her finger. "May he call you Grandma?" I whispered. She cried yes, stroking his silky head. We returned home to Magnolia Street and forged a strange, beautiful life in her modest abode. She taught him nursery rhymes in French and Spanish, and I taught him how to giggle at my ridiculous expressions. He took his first wobbly steps, reaching for her reading glasses, which glinted in the afternoon sun. He learned to say mama to me and grandma to her. I finally understood that family meant choosing one another day after day. We found a happiness I hadn't thought possible given the tempestuous start. My father reappeared when Leo was 2.5 years old, after my cousin Samantha Rhodes carelessly posted a photo of us at the Franklin Park Zoo. He stood on the porch in his expensive charcoal suit, proclaiming, "Your grandmother is on her deathbed, consumed by shame, and she wishes to meet her only grandson." He added, "Come home, beg forgiveness for the embarrassment you caused, and perhaps we can negotiate a reconciliation," as if the entire ordeal had been my doing. Charlotte Hayes stepped between us. "You need to leave or I'm contacting the police to report child abandonment." "That is my daughter you are interfering with," he roared. Leo was sobbing, clinging terrified to my knees, afraid of the angry stranger. "She became my daughter the day you tossed her into the snow," Eleanor Vance retorted, her voice resonant enough to silence any auditorium full of students. My father's face turned beet red with fury. He pointed at her, screaming that she was a predator, preying on vulnerable teenage girls, and swore he would ensure everyone knew her true colors. I wanted desperately to disappear, but Eleanor simply offered a small, calm smile. "Everyone already knows who I am. I'm the woman who rescued your daughter when you failed her." The next morning, Eleanor did not join us for breakfast. My gut knew something was wrong before my mind could process it. I found her on her bedroom floor, clutching her chest and weakly groaning my name, as if struggling to convey something vital. The paramedics worked on her for 40 minutes while she strained to reach out to me. Leo kept asking why Grandma wouldn't wake up and why her skin was so pale. I begged them to try harder, telling them she was our entire world. She survived, but at the hospital, she was placed on full life support, machines taking over her breathing and circulation. "She designated you as her medical proxy last year," the doctor explains, handing me documents I couldn't read because my hands were shaking so violently. "She didn't want extraordinary measures. You need to decide soon whether to withdraw life support." I held her hand while Leo innocently played with her fingers, confused why she wouldn't squeeze back for their morning game. I whispered repeatedly, "Please, don't leave us." The relentless beeping of the machines filled the intensive care unit as I gripped Eleanor Vance's cold hand tighter. Leo kept pulling on her fingers, waiting for the counting game they played every morning. Dr. David Lee stood at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand, watching me with a patient but somber expression. Leo tugged my sleeve and asked why Grandma wasn't singing their good morning song. My throat tightened. Just yesterday, she was standing on our porch, her teacher's voice scolding my father. Now, her face was the color of old parchment, her breath dictated by tubes. Dr. Lee cleared his throat and stepped closer, handing me the signed papers. He pointed to Eleanor's signature and explained my responsibility as her medical proxy. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the clipboard steady. The document detailed her wishes for no heroic interventions in her neat, familiar teacher script, the same handwriting I'd seen marking hundreds of my essays. He reassured me we didn't have to decide immediately, but we should respect her directive. Leo began to cry. He was hungry and terrified by the incessant beeping. A gentle woman entered, introducing herself as Patricia Jones, the social worker. With a heavy folder under her arm, she suggested we find a quieter place to talk. She led us to a small family lounge down the hall that had some toys for Leo. While he built a tower of blocks, she patiently explained the implications of being a medical proxy, handing me hospital brochures. Her soothing tone helped the knot in my chest loosen slightly. She promised she'd be available to guide us through everything, leaving her direct number on a card. Dr. David Lee knocked and came in, prepared to explain what had happened to Eleanor's heart and brain. He sat opposite me, using his hands to illustrate how her heart had stopped pumping blood for nearly an hour. The emergency team restarted it, but her brain was starved of oxygen for too long. He scheduled further tests for the next day to assess her neurological function properly. Leo continued to pull at my sleeve, asking when we could return to Grandma's house for lunch. Dr. Lee's expression remained kind but firm as he stated that 40 minutes without oxygen typically resulted in severe and irreversible damage. The ICU normally restricted children, but the nurses made an exception for Leo. He refused to eat his crackers unless he could see Grandma and cried whenever we tried to leave. I had to keep him distracted with coloring pages while physicians came in and out with updates. Patricia Jones offered to arrange for volunteers to watch Leo during critical meetings if necessary. That night, I sat in the hard plastic chair beside Eleanor's bed, cradling Leo. He finally drifted off on my chest, thumb in mouth. I kept recalling the first night, 3 years ago, when she took me in. She'd made me chamomile tea and let me cry for hours without questioning me, repeating only, "You are safe now." I finally believed her then. Now I was whispering those same words to her motionless body beneath the tubes. Leo shifted in his sleep, and I was overcome by the realization that without her, we were functionally orphans. The fear from the previous day washed over me again in waves. My father's furious, purple face, shouting that Eleanor was a predator, replayed in my mind. My stomach twisted with anxiety as I remembered his threat to destroy her reputation. Patricia must have noticed my ragged breathing because she inquired about any safety concerns. I reluctantly told her about my father's recent visit and his accusations against Eleanor. She wrote something on her clipboard and promised to immediately make a note in the hospital security system. Later that night, after Leo finally fell asleep on the small cot the nurses brought in, I read Eleanor's personal writings. The advance directive meticulously explained her stance on ventilators and feeding tubes in legal language. My eyes blurred as I read the line stating, "No artificial life support if recovery was hopeless." She had added a handwritten personal note at the bottom in blue ink. It explained that she had watched Vivian suffer on machines for 3 agonizing weeks and never wished that fate upon herself. The full weight of the situation crashed down on me in the hallway. I couldn't breathe, a crushing sensation on my chest. Patricia found me hunched over near the vending machines, gasping for air. She gently showed me how to inhale for 4 counts, hold, and then exhale slowly. She kept her hand steady on my back, assuring me I wasn't facing this alone. She gave me a pamphlet on grief, which I tucked into my pocket unread. The next morning, an older woman named Mabel Klein arrived wearing a hospital volunteer vest. She offered to take Leo to the playroom so I could meet with the doctors without distraction. I hesitated to let him go with a stranger, but I desperately needed to focus. Mabel had a warm, grandmotherly presence that Leo immediately responded to. He grabbed his favorite book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which Grandma always read to him. Mabel promised they'd read it together and try some puzzles. I watched them walk down the corridor, my heart pounding, but I knew I had to trust her. Patricia was already waiting for me in a small meeting room, papers spread across the table, with a man in a wrinkled dress shirt seated beside her. When I walked in, he stood and extended his hand. Patricia introduced him. "This is Marcus Lowell from Legal Aid. He's here to help you navigate the complexity of the situation." His handshake was firm, but kind, and the deep lines around his eyes suggested a man who had seen enough to be non-judgmental. He pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in notes and began to outline the basics of my medical proxy authority. As I kept glancing anxiously at the door, worried about Leo, Marcus explained that my duty was not to choose what I wanted for Eleanor, but to ensure her own documented decisions were honored. He handed me new printouts of the advance directive and systematically walked through each section while I struggled to focus on his words instead of the suffocating tightness in my chest. When I brought up my father and asked if he could legally take Leo, Marcus's entire demeanor changed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. He stated unequivocally that my father had no legal standing because he had ejected me while I was pregnant and had never established a relationship with his grandson. Eleanor had been meticulous. Her proxy designation was witnessed and notarized, making it legally ironclad. He mentions that should Eleanor pass, there would be probate and estate issues, but we would cross that bridge later. The relief hit me so hard, I burst into tears right there in the small room. Marcus silently pushed a box of tissues across the table, and Patricia rubbed my back. After composing myself, I told Marcus I needed one final, definitive assessment of Eleanor's brain function before making a final decision. He nodded, calling it a highly rational and responsible request, which made me feel less overwhelmed by a decision no 20-year-old should ever face. We returned to the ICU, where Dr. Lee was checking Eleanor's monitors. I requested a second neurological evaluation. He didn't hesitate or show annoyance. He simply said he completely understood and would schedule it for the next day with their top neurologist. He even commended my thoroughness, which lessened the burden of my responsibility. Leo rushed back from the playroom with Mabel, clutching a drawing of him and Grandma reading. He scrambled onto my lap and pointed to the devices around the bed, asking if the doctors were fixing Grandma's broken head. I assured him they were doing their very best. Mabel slipped out quietly, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze. The next morning, my phone rang before Leo woke. The woman on the line identified herself as being from the Jefferson School District's HR department. She explained they had received a formal complaint regarding Eleanor Vance's inappropriate conduct with a student. My blood ran cold. I knew my father was trying to ruin her, even as she lay dying. The HR representative sounded dubious, repeating, "We have to investigate any complaint. It's just procedure." But I could tell she suspected it was malicious nonsense. She noted that someone would need to interview me eventually, but they were only gathering preliminary facts for the time being. I hung up, wanting to smash the phone, but Leo was stirring on his hospital cot. That afternoon, Leo's forehead felt hot during lunch, and he began to cry, complaining of a stomach ache. The ICU nurse took his temperature, 101.4 degrees Fahrenheit. We needed to go to the pediatric emergency department immediately. I had to leave Eleanor alone with the machines, carrying Leo down 3 flights to pediatrics, where we waited for 45 minutes to be seen. Leo kept asking for Grandma's kiss to make the ouchies go away, as she always did when he was sick. The pediatric nurses were kind but extremely busy, and it took a while for them to determine it was just a mild virus, likely due to stress and the hospital environment. They gave him fever reducer and stressed the need for hydration. I sat there, emotionally torn between needing to be with him and urgently wanting to return to Eleanor. We got back to the ICU that evening. Dr. Lee was waiting with another doctor I hadn't met. They had performed the second neurological exam that morning while I was dealing with Leo's fever, and they now had the results. Dr. Lee's face told me everything before he spoke, but he was careful to explain that the test confirmed severe anoxic brain injury with no discernible brain activity. The other doctor showed me the images on his iPad, pointing out all the dark areas where Eleanor's brain tissue was damaged from lack of oxygen. He confirmed there was no prospect of recovery from this extent of damage. The machines were only supporting the basic functions of her brainstem. The words felt like physical blows, but I was grateful they didn't offer false hope. Patricia Jones arrived right after and announced she had scheduled a family care meeting with the entire team for the next morning to discuss goals and next steps. She framed it as standard procedure for difficult end-of-life decisions, assuring me they would support whatever decision I made for Eleanor. That night, I sat next to Eleanor's bed, holding her hand while Leo slept restlessly in his crib, still warm from the fever. I told her about his temperature, his desperate requests for her kisses, and the ridiculous HR complaint we both knew was my father's doing. I pulled a notebook from my bag and began writing her a letter, a final outpouring of everything I'd never properly said. The words came out smudged with tears, but I wrote about how she saved my life that morning in the school bathroom and became the true mother I desperately needed. I wrote that Leo would always remember his grandma as the most courageous woman who chose us when everyone else walked away. My voice cracked and failed as I read it aloud to her lifeless form. While I was reading, two of Eleanor's teaching colleagues silently approached with a cardboard box. They didn't say much, just squeezed my shoulder and left the box on the chair. Inside were dozens of cards from her students and fellow teachers, each expressing how much she meant to them. Leo seemed intrigued by all the bright drawings and began pulling them out one by one. Marcus Lowell returned that afternoon with additional paperwork and a solemn look. He explained that given my father's escalating harassment, the confrontation, the threats, and now the HR complaint, we needed to file for a restraining order immediately. He had already drafted the paperwork, showing me where to sign and emphasizing that the pattern of behavior would compel the court to take it seriously. I signed wherever he directed as Leo played with his pen cap. I was thankful someone with a clear head was focused on protecting us when my own thoughts were scattered. Patricia came back as Marcus was finishing and noticed me staring at the hospital billing statement, which had already begun to arrive. The numbers made my stomach drop. A single day in the ICU cost more than I had ever conceived of. She sat next to me and pulled out a new packet, explaining that the hospital had charity care programs for cases like mine. We spent the next hour filling out forms, with Patricia helping me list my meager income from online tutoring and guiding me to indicate I had no savings. She repeatedly assured me that Eleanor's insurance would cover most of the medical expenses and that the hospital would not force me into debt over this. The relief was so great I cried again, having imagined losing everything on top of losing her. That evening, my phone was bombarded with notifications from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. Someone sent me a screenshot of my father's post on the Central New Jersey Town Forum Facebook page, where he labeled Eleanor a groomer preying on vulnerable girls. He twisted her taking me in when I was homeless and pregnant into something dark and abusive. Comments were pouring in, some defending her as the best teacher they'd ever had, while others who didn't know her believed his lies and demanded investigations. I wanted to type out the truth about how she saved us, but Marcus snatched my phone away and firmly said no. He stressed that anything I wrote could be legally used against us later, and that we had to remain silent, even though it broke my heart to see her name dragged through the mud while she was dying. The next morning, the big care meeting Patricia had organized took place. The conference room was full of doctors, nurses, and a woman who introduced herself as the hospital's ethics consultant. She spoke with a calm rationale that made me feel less frantic. She discussed quality of life, the definition of pain, and what it truly meant to honor a person's wishes. She reread Eleanor Vance's advance directive, focusing on the section where she stated she did not want machines to sustain her life if there was no hope for recovery. The consultant gently helped me understand that keeping her on life support, against her explicit written instructions, wasn't an act of love, but a violation of her beliefs. By the end of the meeting, I was crying uncontrollably. But finally, I knew what I had to do. That night was the absolute hardest. Though every fiber of my being wanted to keep her here forever, Leo had recurring nightmares, waking up screaming for Grandma to check under the bed for monsters. He started sucking his thumb again, a habit he hadn't had since he was an infant. It broke my heart to see his regression. I held him close in the narrow hospital cot as he wailed, asking why Grandma wouldn't wake up to sing the song that chased bad dreams away. All I could do was rock him, whispering that Grandma loved him even while she was resting, which only made him scream harder. He knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. The next day, Marcus Lowell informed me we needed to go to Eleanor's house to retrieve essential documents before any official decisions were made. Driving there without her in the passenger seat, not prompting Leo to look for blue cars as they always did, felt surreal. Walking through the front door using the key she'd given me felt criminal, even though she had always insisted her house was ours too. The smell hit me first. A comforting blend of sandalwood lotion and old paperbacks, the scent of safety for the last 3 years. Her coffee mug was still on the kitchen table, next to a stack of essays she'd been marking, her reading glasses perched on top, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. Leo dashed straight to his toy chest in the living room, pulling out the wooden blocks Grandma had given him for his birthday. While I stood paralyzed, unable to move, Marcus gently guided me toward her home office, explaining we needed insurance policies, bank records, and any vital paperwork. In her office, I found a massive binder on the desk titled Important Documents in her beautiful, neat script. It had tabs for everything: insurance policies, bank accounts, the house deed. Everything was organized with sticky notes clarifying each item. She had prepared for me to need help understanding it all. Tucked in the very back was a sealed envelope with my name on it, which made my hands tremble so violently I could barely open it. Inside was a long handwritten letter. She wrote about how Leo and I had become the children she and Vivian had always longed for. She described how the morning she found me in the school bathroom was the day her life began to make sense again after Vivian's death. She stated that watching me grow into a mother, despite everything, had been the greatest privilege of her life. The letter ended by assuring me I was strong enough to raise Leo no matter what happened, and that she would always be proud of her daughter, even if no law acknowledged it. I sat on the office floor, sobbing, clutching a letter that felt like a final farewell, while Leo played in the next room. Marcus sat down next to me and began going through the binder, explaining everything simply. Eleanor Vance had left everything to me and Leo in her will, but the house had a substantial mortgage. She had refinanced to cover Vivian's cancer treatments. He showed me the credit card statements and medical bills I never knew existed because she had shielded me from the worry. The probate process, he warned, would take months, and we might be forced to sell the house to pay off the debts. The thought of losing her house on top of losing her was paralyzing, but Marcus promised we'd handle it one step at a time. Back at the hospital, Dr. Lee was waiting with a new proposal that made my chest tighten. He wanted to reduce Eleanor's sedation the next morning to conduct one final, definitive test for any response to stimulation. He was careful to stress that this was purely for thoroughness, that we shouldn't expect any change based on all prior tests, but he understood my need for certainty before making the ultimate decision. I consented immediately. I needed to know, for myself, that she truly wasn't in there anymore. The test day arrived. They slowly lowered her medications while Dr. Lee and 2 other specialists watched the monitors. Leo sat on my lap, playing with his toy car and making vroom noises as we waited for Eleanor to hear us. Dr. Lee called her name, shone lights in her eyes, and squeezed her nail beds to check for a pain response. Her eyes remained unfocused, staring blankly ahead as he passed his hand in front of her face. He asked her to squeeze his hand, but her fingers stayed limp. Her pupils showed no proper reaction to light, and none of the painful stimuli elicited a response. After 30 minutes of testing, Dr. Lee placed his hand on my shoulder and confirmed what I already knew but needed to hear. Eleanor Vance would not wake up. She had no meaningful brain function left. The machines were keeping her body alive, but she was not present. Leo looked up from his car and asked if Grandma was all fixed now. I had to tell him no, struggling not to break down. That afternoon, Patricia Jones brought in a counselor specializing in grief therapy for young caregivers. We sat right next to Eleanor's bed. The counselor validated how devastating the situation was for someone my age. She said it was perfectly fine to feel angry, terrified, and overwhelmed simultaneously. She taught me a grounding breathing technique, count to 4 inhaling, hold, count to 4 exhaling, which actually helped when I felt panic rising. The counselor explained that anticipatory grief was as real as regular loss, and I wasn't weak for mourning Eleanor while she was still breathing. She normalized all my feelings, assuring me it was natural to wish someone else could make this decision. My phone rang as I was leaving Eleanor's room, and I almost let the unfamiliar number go to voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice was small and brittle. She asked if it was true that Eleanor was in the hospital. She had heard the Facebook post from my cousin Samantha and wanted to know if we could work something out so she could finally meet Leo. Her words were a confusing mix of apologies and conditions about coming home if I would only apologize to Dad for the trouble I'd caused. She asked if we could meet in secret because he would be furious if he knew she called. The conversation made me want to throw my phone against the wall. Even now, she couldn't just be a mother without strings attached. I told her she could only meet Leo if my father was completely uninvolved, and that we would meet in a busy public location. She agreed, but her voice trembled with the fear of going behind his back, and I realized she was as trapped as I had been before Eleanor rescued me. We arranged to meet at Mercer County Park the following week, provided she could slip away unnoticed. The school's HR representative called shortly after to say their investigation was complete and found absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing. Multiple teachers had provided statements confirming Eleanor Vance's consistent professionalism. They were keeping the file open only for procedural reasons, but it was clear they saw through my father's lies. One tiny victory while everything else was collapsing. The next morning, a child life specialist arrived to help Leo process what was happening with his grandmother. She brought dolls and sat on the floor with him, demonstrating how Grandma's body was very sick and how the machines were doing the breathing for her. Leo watched her move the dolls and seemed to grasp why Grandma couldn't wake up, but he kept asking if she would be better tomorrow. The specialist was patient, repeatedly explaining in simple terms that sometimes bodies get too sick to ever recover. Leo nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. He kept looking toward the door, waiting for Grandma to walk in. That afternoon, I took Leo to the Pleasant Hills Cemetery, where Vivian Stone was buried. I felt Eleanor would want to know. Leo ran around picking dandelions while I sat by the headstone, telling Vivian that Eleanor would be joining her soon. I described how Eleanor saved us, became our true family, and how difficult it was for me to let her go, even knowing what she wanted. Leo brought a handful of dandelions and placed them on the stone, asking Grandma to play with the nice lady in heaven. I said yes through my tears, hugging him as he waved goodbye to Vivian's grave. Back at the hospital, Dr. Lee was waiting with his final report. His expression confirmed what he was about to say. He emphasized that continuing life support was not helping Eleanor and directly contradicted her documents about not wanting machines. He was gentle but direct. It was time to let her pass peacefully, without further suffering. The weight of his words crushed my chest. That evening, I sat alone in Eleanor's room, reopening her letter, while Leo played with his cars on the floor. Her handwriting blurred through my tears as I read her wishes, not to be kept alive by machines, and her trust in me to make the right decision. She wrote how incredibly proud she was of the mother I had become, and how lucky Leo was to have me. She gave me permission to release her, promising she would watch over us, just as Vivian had watched over her. Every instinct told me to keep her here, even as a body breathing through tubes. But I knew that wasn't love. It was selfishness. Marcus Lowell stopped by the next morning with the final paperwork from my father's restraining order, confirming the court date was set for the following month. He said the Facebook posts and the bogus HR complaint demonstrated a clear pattern that judges take seriously. The legal protection felt like Eleanor was still fighting for us from her hospital bed. That same afternoon, my father tried to enter the hospital, but security stopped him at the main entrance thanks to Patricia Jones's initial warning. He created a massive disturbance, demanding to see his grandson and ranting about his rights. As onlookers stared, the guards escorted him out and handed him an official trespass warning. I watched from an upstairs window, scared, but protected by the network of people Eleanor had put in place for us. Mabel Klein brought Leo to the playroom while I attended one final counseling session to practice the breathing exercises before making my final choice. The counselor helped me separate my sadness over Eleanor's death from my commitment to respect her wishes. She reminded me that loving someone means honoring their choices, even when it causes immense pain. I left that session knowing exactly what I had to do. Despite every cell in my body screaming against it, the next morning, I found Dr. Lee in the corridor checking charts, and my legs felt like jelly as I approached him. I informed him we would withdraw life support tomorrow, so Leo and I could say our proper goodbyes. He nodded, resting his hand on my shoulder for a moment, and assured me they would ensure she was comfortable with medication. The nurses would give us all the time we needed. Leo was playing with his toy cars in the waiting room when I scooped him up and carried him into Eleanor's room. We spent the entire day preparing the room for our farewell, with her favorite book of Robert Frost poetry, which she read every Sunday. The nurses helped us tape Leo's crayon drawings around the bed, including stick figures of our tiny family holding hands. One nurse brought non-toxic paint, and we made handprints on paper, Leo's little palm pressed against Eleanor's larger one. Leo kissed each of Grandma's fingers one by one, like a morning game, as I played Vivian's favorite jazz music on my phone. He kept asking when Grandma would wake up to see his beautiful pictures, and I just hugged him tighter. That night, after Leo fell asleep in the chair, I set up my phone to record a video message for him to watch when he was older. I described who Eleanor Vance was and how she rescued us when no one else would. My voice kept breaking as I told the camera about her choice to be his grandmother and her love for him from the first moment. I talked about all the songs she taught him, the books she read, and her bravery in standing up to my father. The video lasted 25 minutes, a rambling account of tears and retakes, but I needed him to know everything. The morning of the withdrawal came too quickly. My whole body shook when the respiratory team arrived. They explained each step as I gripped Eleanor Vance's hand so tightly my knuckles were white. Leo sat on my knee, playing with her other hand and softly humming the lullaby she always sang before bed. When they disconnected the ventilator, there was a strange hiss and the room grew quiet, devoid of the machine sounds. Eleanor Vance's chest moved on its own for the first time in days, but each breath was shallow and widely spaced. I murmured in her ear that we loved her and that it was okay to go be with Vivian, who was waiting. Leo waved goodbye to Grandma and blew kisses, just as we taught him to do before daycare. Her breathing slowed over the next 35 minutes as I told her everything I was grateful for. The final breath was so faint I almost missed it. There was silence for a long minute before the nurse checked for a pulse. She gently shook her head and recorded the time. I sat there holding Leo, who was trying to encourage Grandma to wake up for their morning song. The doctor came in to confirm and sign the paperwork, while other nurses arrived to disconnect the monitors and IVs. They allowed us to stay with her body for an hour. Leo patted her face, imploring her to open her eyes. Patricia Jones stood silently in the doorway, a reassuring presence. The organ donation coordinator arrived to explain that Eleanor couldn't donate due to her age and heart condition, which felt wrong. She should have been able to help people even after death, just as she did in life. We arranged for the funeral home to take her, and I chose cremation, which she had requested in her documents. The school principal called to announce a memorial service in 2 weeks, at the gymnasium where she had taught for 22 years. Leo cried the entire way to the car, unable to understand why we were leaving Grandma alone at the hospital. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I struggled to explain death to a 2-year-old who kept looking for Grandma. The school's HR department formally closed their inquiry, issuing a letter stating they found no evidence of any inappropriate behavior. Eleanor's teacher friends organized the most beautiful memorial, featuring photos from her entire career and poems read by former students. Many people stepped forward to describe how she had changed their lives or supported them through crises. A few anonymously mentioned her helping a student in need, which made me cry harder. Leo played with his blocks in the corner, glancing up every few minutes for Grandma. My father attended the memorial, despite the court-approved restraining order Marcus Lowell had filed. Before he could approach us, school security intercepted him and escorted him out as he ranted about his rights. My mother sat in the very last row, tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to reach us. The entire room, filled with people who adored Eleanor Vance, made my father's malice seem insignificant and pathetic. After the service, Marcus sat me down to explain the probate situation. My stomach lurched when he showed me the figures. Eleanor had taken out a substantial second mortgage to pay for Vivian Stone's cancer treatments, leaving very little equity in the house. The monthly payments were far beyond what I could afford, even with the full-time job, which I didn't have. He advised selling the house immediately before it went into foreclosure, so we could salvage something. Packing up Eleanor's house felt like tearing my heart out piece by piece. Leo kept asking when we were going home to see Grandma. I could only take what would fit into our new subsidized apartment, which accepted my state housing voucher. The two-bedroom unit reeked of stale carpet and old smoke, but it was better than a shelter, and it was affordable. Despite having no furniture yet, I carefully packed every single one of Eleanor Vance's favorite books. Leo picked out book after book on the first night in the apartment, begging me to read them in Grandma's voice. I tried my best, but my voice sounded nothing like hers, and he knew it. We built a special shelf just for her books, and he touched them all before bed as a new ritual. The next morning, as Leo ate his cereal, I opened my laptop and began filling out the community college application. The personal essay box stared back at me, empty. I typed about how Eleanor Vance saved my life after my own family discarded me, and how she showed me I could write my way to a better life. My fingers trembled as I wrote about being 17, pregnant, and abandoned, until a teacher noticed me and decided I was worth saving. The admissions counselor called 2 days later. Her voice cracked as she announced she had read my essay 3 times and would waive the application fee. She provided me with contact information for support services, noting the college had resources for single parents. I hung up crying. Eleanor had always promised education was my way out. Leo's first day at the subsidized childcare center was the hardest morning since the hospital. He screamed, wrapping his arms so tightly around my neck I couldn't breathe. As the teacher tried to gently separate him, he kept crying for Grandma, reaching desperately for me as I backed out of the room. I ended up vomiting in the parking lot from guilt and anxiety. The teacher called after lunch to say he had stopped weeping and was now playing with blocks. By day 3, he cried for only 10 minutes. By the second week, he ran to show me the picture he had drawn and barely whimpered when I left. My mother texted, asking to meet at the park near the Hudson River. I agreed, but insisted she come alone, or I would leave immediately. She arrived with a bag of new toys for Leo, her face looking older and exhausted. She watched Leo play on the swings and finally apologized for not protecting me, for letting him throw me out, for being too afraid to leave him. I told her, "Sorry won't bring those years back, but I'll take whatever you can offer as long as you respect our boundaries." She nodded and handed Leo a toy elephant, which he clutched tightly as she quietly wept. Marcus Lowell called to confirm the court date for the restraining order hearing. He said the judge had reviewed all the material, including the Facebook posts and the bogus school report. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. My father's lawyer argued about parental rights, and Marcus presented the screenshots of harassment and threats. The judge granted the order for 3 years, warning my father that any violation would result in immediate arrest. Marcus later confirmed that the online attacks slowed down significantly, though my father continued to post general rants about ungrateful children on pages I didn't follow. The online tutoring website accepted my profile based on the teaching methodology Eleanor Vance had shown me while I helped her grade papers. My first student was a middle schooler struggling with essay structure. I taught him the same outlining technique Eleanor taught me. The next week, 4 new students signed up, and I soon found myself tutoring 18 hours a week on top of my own college coursework. The money barely covered groceries and gas, but each small payment was a confirmation that we could make it. Leo learned to play quietly while I worked, and I'd feed him goldfish crackers to keep him silent during video calls. 5 months after Eleanor Vance died, the school proposed placing a memorial bench beneath her favorite reading tree where she used to eat lunch. The principal asked me to speak at the ceremony. I stayed up all night writing about how teachers save lives simply by seeing the children others overlook. Leo gathered dandelions from the apartment complex lawn to bring to Grandma's tree. I stood at the microphone, Leo on my hip, reading about Eleanor Vance, the woman who took in a pregnant 17-year-old no one wanted and built a family. The entire English department was crying, and several former students approached later to say she had also helped them through tough times. Leo placed his flowers on the bench and patted it as if he were petting her. Our nightly ritual became sacred. Leo would choose one of Grandma's books and climb onto my lap as I read in a voice that would never be hers. We'd look at her framed picture on his dresser. He would tell her about his day at daycare, what he ate for lunch, and who pushed him on the slide. He occasionally asked when she would come back, but mostly he'd just wave and say, "Night-night, Grandma." The grief still pressed heavily on my chest every night, but so did the echo of her voice, assuring me I was stronger than I knew. Last night I lay in our small apartment, listening to Leo's steady breathing, the neighbors arguing through the thin walls, and the distant sirens of Newark. My body ached from exhaustion, but we had made it through another day, and we would do it again tomorrow. Leo started saying "Mama" more clearly this week, and every time I heard it, I remembered Eleanor Vance's delight when he first said "Grandma." We were building something new with the pieces she left us, choosing each other every single day, just as she had taught us. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider supporting our channel for more genuine stories of family resilience. Thank you for watching.